We begin on Capitol Hill, where the bitter fight over federal funding is not over yet. Just hours ago, the federal government shut down 1 minute after midnight for the first time in nearly 7 years. And it came after the Senate failed to pass a short-term funding bill that would have kept the government open for 7 more weeks. Now the Senate is back in session as we speak. Senate Majority Leader John Thune says more votes are expected. Earlier, he and House Speaker Mike Johnson weighed in on the state of the play.
The simple truth is Democrats in Congress have dragged our country into another reckless shutdown to satisfy their far-left base. That is the truth. Whether or not the government remains open or reopens is entirely up to them.
Chuck Schumer, at the behest of a bunch of liberal, far-left activist groups, has walked his Democrat colleagues into a boxed canyon. There's no way out, folks. There's no way out. This could have been avoided. It's totally unavoidable. And everybody's now asking the question, how does this end? Well, it ends when the Senate Democrats pick this bill up, passed by the House of Representatives, and vote for it.
And we are expecting to hear much more from those leaders today. But first of all, let's get to the Hill and CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Nikole, good to see you today. Can you take us through what is happening in the Senate today and if there are any signs of actually reaching a compromise?
Well, we'll have to see how things continue to play out. But for now, both sides continue to be dug in pretty deep, if you will. What we will see in the Senate, at least this morning, is that they will try to make another attempt at moving the ball forward with respect to a government funding bill. So we may see some procedural votes along that line. Of course, this comes after just yesterday we saw the Senate vote down not one, but two measures to fund the government, one being that House-backed bill that Majority Leader John Thune referenced that would fund the government for about 7 weeks, also include some extra security funding to help protect lawmakers, the Supreme Court, and the executive branch. But then you had a Democratic alternative that also had some of their priorities tucked in with respect to health care. As I mentioned, both of those voted down, although we did see some Democrats sign on to that House-backed bill, Nevada Senator Cortez Masto, as well as Maine Senator Angus King, who's an independent. So that being said, as you've heard Leader Thune there say, they need more Democrats to kind of follow suit to be able to get this over the finish line. But certainly Leader Schumer is trying to keep his caucus in line and hold this firewall, if you will, to try to get Republicans to the negotiating table with respect to some of their concerns around health care.
And one of the biggest hurdles to passing this funding bill is health care. Can you take us through the issue and why Democrats and Republicans are so divided on this?
Yeah, well, they are and they aren't, depending on who you talk to. They are from a partisan standpoint in that one of the big demands that Democrats have is they want to see a rollback of the Medicaid cuts that were passed in the big, beautiful bill. But I mean, that was a huge signature priority for the president. So rolling that back is really a non-starter for Republicans. Where there does seem to be some wiggle room potentially is around this issue of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as some people know it. There are some subsidies that are due to expire at the end of this year. And so Democrats and even some Republicans have warned that, those premiums could go up for a lot of folks. And so that's why they believe there should be some type of extension. Of course, Democrats are pushing for a permanent extension, whereas Republicans like Leader Thune have indicated, we may be open to extending these, but there have to be some reforms with respect to how they're administered. So again, whether or not they'll make some headway on that issue remains to be seen. And until they do, the government remains shut down.
Yeah, it's a waiting game right now. Nikole Killion on Capitol Hill for us today. Thank you. Vice President J.D. Vance joined CBS Mornings earlier and placed the blame on Democrats for the shutdown. He warned that Americans could feel the effects of lawmakers failing to reach an agreement.
We're in this position because Senate Democrats decided that they were going to shut down the government despite the fact that the House voted to keep the government open. We're going to have to deal with it. We're going to have to make sure that as much of the people's government remains open or functional as possible. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. But there's going to be some pain, and there's necessarily going to be some pain because Senate Democrats refuse to reopen the government. We hope that they'll change their minds in the days to come.
I want to bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, thank you for joining us today. How is the president reacting to the shutdown so far?
Well, the president's been remarkably quiet so far this morning, Mugo, but the White House writ large is responding, arguing that this is entirely the fault of congressional Democrats. There is a new shutdown clock at the top of the White House webpage, basically claiming that it has been 10, 11 hours since the Democrats plunged the country into a shutdown. They argue that this was a straight up or down vote to fund the government, and because most Democrats voted no, we are now in the situation that we are in. They are also claiming repeatedly that Democrats were holding out because they wanted to provide health care for people who are in this country illegally. That is not the case. The Democrats were holding out for changes to Medicaid and for a renewal of subsidies for Obamacare premiums. But nevertheless, this is a talking point that everybody from the president to the vice president on down continues to repeat.
And Nancy, President Trump has continued to taunt Democrats on social media by posting photos of the White House, of their White House meeting, where you can see Trump 2028 hats on his desk. What are you hearing about that?
Right. I mean, basically the troller in chief posting these pictures. Clearly, he was hoping that he would get a rise out of the Democratic leaders who were there in the room, or perhaps Democrats who are looking at these pictures online, because Trump 2028 is a reference to the fact that some of his supporters have been pushing for him to run for a third term, something he has openly flirted with, even as he has acknowledged that the Constitution doesn't currently allow that.
Okay. Nancy Cordes at the White House for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And with the U.S. economy already facing headwinds, a lengthy shutdown can weigh on investor and, of course, consumer confidence. An economist for EY Parthenon tells CBS News each week the government shutdown could cost the U.S. economy around $7 billion. So let's bring in CBS News MoneyWatch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. And Kelly, let's talk about this. What could be the impact of a drawn-out shutdown on the U.S. economy as a whole?
Well, Mugo, I just want to put some context around that $7 billion a week figure, because I know that people at home, you hear that and you go, whoa, that seems like a lot. And I don't want to dismiss it, but for context, it is 0.1% of U.S. GDP, right? So when you sort of think of it that way, this isn't a dire panic situation. It's not nothing, but it just gives you a little bit more context of how big that number is. Now, you look at the number of workers that are estimated to be furloughed by the Congressional Budget Office at 750,000. They estimated that's $400 million worth of wages each day. And so that's really where the economic impact goes in some respect, because if you are furloughed, or maybe you're working, but you aren't getting paid, even if you're going to get back pay weeks from now, maybe when the shutdown is over, you don't maybe have that money to go pay rent. You don't have that money to go spend on that vacation. And so that's where you start to see that ripple effect when it comes to economic activity. Now, if you're not a federal worker, I do want to emphasize, services like your Social Security checks, your Medicare insurance, like those things aren't going to go away. Nothing's going to change there. But the longer this goes on, this does have that sort of ever-moving ripple effect, Mugo.
And so, Kelly, let's talk about the Labor Department, because they say they won't release their September jobs report, due out this week, by the way, in just a few days, if the government shuts down. So what does not having this data mean? And has this happened before?
Well, it means I'm going to have to find something to talk about with you, Mugo, on Friday, because that was on my docket. I guess we'll be talking about this. But yeah, so this actually has happened before. If you go back to 2013, I think the government was shut down for 16 days, and it did delay the release of reports like the jobs report, as well as, remember, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It also collects the inflation data, both consumer and producer prices, all things that the Fed will look at when it determines its next interest rate decision. And that actually did cause a cascading effect. It wasn't just that immediate report. All data collection back in 2013 stopped.
Oh, wow.
And so that delayed future reports as well. So it's sort of a little bit of a domino effect here.
Yeah.
This time around, it is equally, if not more important, because the Federal Reserve, right, we are dealing with this tension between a weakening labor market and inflation that's starting to heat up a little bit. So if they don't have that data come the end of October, they may just decide to be more cautious, go with a wait and see approach and say, hey, you know, we're not going to do that rate cut. That's what some analysts have predicted. And the market is definitely pricing in a quarter-point rate cut. People want to see that. So that's really an important piece of that sometimes gets lost, that, yeah, data, numbers, like these things, really, when you stop collecting that data, when you don't release that, it has a cascading effect that even can influence your auto loan interest rate and your mortgage rate, Mugo.
Wow. So, Kelly, come Friday, if we don't have those numbers, I suppose we'll just have to talk about something else here on 24/7, right? There's so much going on when it comes to the economy, so I'm sure you'll have something else for us to talk about, right?
I'll try. I'll put on my thinking cap, Mugo.
All right. Kelly O'Grady, thank you so much for joining us.